The news that her childhood home had been sold, that the last physical tie to her turbulent past was severed, arrived not with a jolt, but with a strange, quiet flatness for Anna. Friends offered condolences, expecting tears, anger, or at least a visible tremor of sadness. But inside, there was nothing. Just a vast, still emptiness. She smiled politely, nodded, and changed the subject. This profound emotional disconnection, this pervasive numbness in the face of life's most impactful moments, left her feeling like a ghost moving through a vibrant world, observing rather than participating. It's a silent withdrawal, a chilling absence of the very feelings that define us as human. This detached existence echoes the serene, almost otherworldly drift of a creature perfectly adapted to its fluid environment. Imagine the seahorse swaying gently with the currents, its gaze unblinking, its movements slow and deliberate, showing no apparent great reactions to the bustling life around it. It simply floats, unhurried, untroubled by the emotional storms that rage beneath the surface for others. What does it mean when we, as humans, adopt this same tranquil detachment, floating through our lives with muted hearts? What are the hidden costs of a soul that has learned to suppress, to disconnect, to simply be without truly feeling? Can we ever truly reawaken the vibrant currents of emotion once we've learned to drift in serene oblivion? The argument with his sister had been explosive, words hurled like jagged stones, leaving deep, invisible wounds. Yet, as Michael watched her storm out, slamming the door, he felt nothing. Not anger, not sadness, not even relief. Just a vast, cold numbness that settled over him, familiar as an old coat. Later that week, at a friend's funeral, while others wept openly, Michael stood dry-eyed, a polite, distant expression on his face. He intellectually understood the gravity of the situation, the pain others felt, but the emotion simply wasn't accessible to him. His body felt heavy, his movements slow. He wanted to feel, to mourn, to connect with the raw pain of others, but his emotional landscape was a desolate, frozen plain. This pervasive numbness had become his default, a silent, chilling absence of the very feelings that once defined his humanity, leaving him observing life through a thick, distorting pane of glass. This profound state of numbness, this apparent lack of strong reaction to external stimuli, finds its compelling parallel in the seahorse's characteristic unblinking gaze and serene demeanor. Seahorses are masters of camouflage, often blending perfectly with their environment, gently swaying with the currents as if they are simply part of the aquatic flora. They lack eyelids, giving them an almost perpetually watchful, yet simultaneously passive, appearance. Their movements are slow, deliberate, and often seem unhurried, almost as if they exist outside the frantic pace of the ocean's food chain. They don't exhibit overt signs of fear, aggression, or distress in the way many other fish do. Their reactions appear minimal, their emotional states seemingly muted. For the seahorse, this unblinking, detached presence is a survival strategy, allowing them to remain hidden and conserve energy, giving the impression of an existence free from turbulent emotional responses. The human experience of numbness or emotional blunting directly mirrors the seahorse's unblinking gaze and muted reactions. In human neurobiology, chronic stress, trauma, or certain mental health conditions can lead to a dysregulation of the limbic system and the prefrontal cortex, affecting emotional processing. This can result in a desensitization to emotional stimuli, a feeling of being disconnected from one's own feelings and those of others. The brain, overwhelmed by past pain or a continuous threat response, may metaphorically shut down emotional pathways as a protective mechanism. Evolutionary psychology suggests that in extreme, life-threatening situations, a temporary emotional detachment can be adaptive, allowing an individual to function under duress. However, when this becomes a chronic state, It leads to a pervasive feeling of emptiness and an inability to experience joy, sorrow, or connection. Just as the seahorse appears to float through its world with an unblinking, muted gaze, a person experiencing emotional numbness exists in a state of passive observation, alienated from the vibrant tapestry of human experience. Michael felt the cold, empty expanse within him, the frustrating absence of feeling. He was confronting the immense personal cost of this pervasive numbness, the way it isolated him from others and from himself. Would he continue to drift through life untouched by joy or sorrow, a silent observer of his own existence? Or would he, like a seahorse that must eventually engage to feed or mate, dare to tentatively explore the submerged currents of his own feelings, risking the discomfort of emotion for the chance of true connection? His instinct was to remain detached, to stay safe from the messy intensity of feelings. But the profound loneliness, the yearning for a vibrant, felt life, now demanded a different, more courageous choice. He had to acknowledge that his numbness was not just protecting him, but also imprisoning him. The seahorse's unblinking gaze and apparent emotional flatness offer a profound metaphor for the human struggle with numbness and emotional blunting. It teaches us that while emotional detachment might offer a shield from pain, a life lived without the full spectrum of feelings ultimately leads to profound emptiness and isolation. By understanding the primal impulse that drives the seahorse's serene drift, we are invited to confront the origins and costs of our own emotional suppression. May we learn from the seahorse to discern when our numbness is a temporary defense and when it is becoming a permanent barrier, and to understand that true vitality lies not in the absence of feeling, but in the courage to re-engage with our emotions, allowing the full currents of life, both joyful and sorrowful, to flow through us once more. Sarah watched her life unfold around her with a perplexing sense of detachment. Her job, once a source of excitement, now felt like a series of meaningless tasks. Her relationships, though ostensibly intact, lacked any real emotional resonance. When friends shared exciting news or personal struggles, she'd offer polite, surface-level responses. But inside, there was no flicker of joy, no pang of empathy, just a profound apathy. The things that once moved her art, music, nature, now left her cold. She felt like a boat adrift, untethered, simply floating wherever the currents took her, unable to muster the energy or desire to steer. This pervasive apathy, this chilling indifference to her own life and the lives of others, left her feeling like a spectator in her own existence, a shadow of the vibrant person she once was. This pervasive apathy, this lack of urgency or strong engagement with their surroundings, finds a fascinating echo in the seahorse's characteristic slow drift. Unlike many agile fish that dart through the water, seahorses move with an almost serene indifference, propelling themselves with a tiny dorsal fin, often anchoring themselves to seagrass with their prehensile tails. They do not exhibit rapid escape responses or aggressive territorial displays. Their method of hunting involves patiently waiting for small crustaceans to drift by, then sucking them up with lightning speed. Otherwise, their existence seems characterized by a profound lack of urgency, a tranquil floating, displaying no apparent stress or excitement. This slow, unhurried, and seemingly unreactive existence is their innate nature, a survival strategy that prioritizes energy conservation and camouflage over active engagement, giving the impression of a creature utterly untouched by the dramatic currents around it. The human experience of apathy often mirrors the seahorse's slow, unhurried drift. In human neurobiology, apathy is frequently linked to dysfunction in the prefrontal cortex and areas involved in reward pathways, leading to a reduction in motivation and emotional responsiveness. Chronic stress, depression, or prolonged periods of emotional suppression can deplete the neurochemicals responsible for drive and pleasure. Psychologically, apathy can be a protective mechanism, a way of shutting down when faced with overwhelming emotional pain or prolonged dissatisfaction. Evolutionary psychology suggests that while drive and motivation are crucial for survival, a temporary state of low energy or disengagement might have been adaptive in times of scarcity or when faced with insurmountable odds. However, when apathy becomes chronic, it leads to a profound lack of purpose, social withdrawal, and an inability to engage with life's joys or challenges. Just as the seahorse drifts through its world with minimal apparent reaction, an apathetic person floats through life untouched by its vibrant emotional currents, a passive observer of their own dwindling engagement. Sarah felt the chilling void of her own apathy, the growing distance between herself and the vibrant world she once inhabited. She was confronting the insidious way her indifference was eroding her connections and her very sense of purpose. Would she continue to drift, allowing the currents of life to carry her wherever they may, without ever truly engaging or striving? Or would she, like a seahorse suddenly spotting its prey, dare to activate, to reach out, to find a tiny spark of interest or passion that could pull her from the depths of her disengagement? Her instinct was to simply float, to expend no energy, to remain untouched. But the profound emptiness, the quiet despair of a life unlived, now demanded a different, more conscious choice. She had to acknowledge that her apathy was not just protecting her, but also consuming her. The seahorse, slow drift, and apparent apathy offer a profound metaphor for the human struggle with emotional disengagement and a lack of passion. It teaches us that while disinterest might offer a temporary escape from life's demands, a prolonged state of apathy ultimately leads to a profound loss of joy, purpose, and connection. By understanding the primal impulse that drives the seahorse's unhurried existence, we are invited to confront the origins and costs of our own indifference. May we learn from the seahorse to discern when our apathy is a protective pause and when it is becoming a suffocating blanket, and to understand that true vitality lies not in the absence of reaction, but in the courage to re-engage with our desires and passions, allowing the vibrant currents of life to stir our souls once more. Liam found himself in a relationship that, from the outside, appeared perfect. Yet, he felt a profound detachment. When his partner spoke of their shared future, he nodded, smiled, but inside, it felt like listening to a story about someone else. When they argued, he could analyze the dynamics rationally, almost clinically, without feeling the sting of anger or the ache of hurt. He observed his own emotions from a distance, as if they were happening to a stranger. This pervasive detachment wasn't a choice. It was a deeply ingrained coping mechanism, a way to navigate life's complexities without being overwhelmed by its emotional intensity. He was present in body, but his emotional core remained distant, anchored in a safe, unfeeling space, leaving him feeling profoundly alone, a silent observer of his own life unfolding. This profound detachment, this ability to maintain a distant perspective, finds its striking parallel in the seahorse's unique method of anchored observation. Seahorses often use their prehensile tails to cling to seagrass or coral, remaining largely stationary while their independent eyes swivel, scanning their surroundings. They are physically present, anchored to their environment, yet their behavior gives the impression of a passive, almost serene observation of the bustling marine world around them. They don't actively pursue or engage in the chaotic chases of many other fish. Instead, they wait, watch, and respond only when absolutely necessary, maintaining a calm, almost dispassionate stance. For the seahorse, this anchored detachment is a key survival strategy, allowing them to remain camouflaged and conserve energy while still being aware of their environment, a testament to the power of observation without overt reaction. The human experience of detachment, particularly as an emotional coping mechanism, closely mirrors the seahorse's anchored observation. In human neurobiology, chronic emotional pain or trauma can lead to dissociation, a psychological state where one feels disconnected from one's thoughts, feelings, memories, or even physical body. The anterior cingulate cortex, involved in emotional regulation, may become less active in processing emotional distress. This detachment can be a protective response, allowing an individual to function in overwhelming situations by creating emotional distance. Evolutionary psychology suggests that a temporary ability to detach might have been adaptive in highly traumatic events, preventing the brain from being completely overwhelmed. However, when it becomes a chronic pattern, it leads to a profound sense of isolation, an inability to form deep emotional bonds, and a feeling of being a mere spectator in one's own life. Just as the seahorse remains anchored but emotionally aloof, a detached person is physically present, but emotionally inaccessible, perpetually observing rather than deeply experiencing. Liam felt the chilling void that his detachment created, the unbridgeable distance between himself and those he claimed to love. He was confronting the immense cost of his emotional absence, the way it robbed his relationships of depth and his own life of vibrant feeling. Would he continue to exist in this state of detached observation, forever safe from pain but also from true joy and intimacy? Or would he, like a seahorse releasing its tail to venture into open water, dare to unanchor himself from his emotional distance, to allow himself to feel the messy, often uncomfortable currents of life, even if it meant risking pain? His instinct was to observe, to analyze, to remain safe from emotional entanglement. But the profound loneliness, the yearning for genuine connection, now demanded a different, more courageous choice. He had to acknowledge that his detachment was not just protecting him, but also suffocating him. The seahorse and anchored observation and apparent detachment offer a profound metaphor for the human struggle with emotional distance and dissociation. It teaches us that while detachment can offer a temporary shield from overwhelming emotions, a prolonged state of emotional absence ultimately leads to profound isolation and an unlived life. By understanding the primal impulse that drives the seahorse's unreactive presence, we are invited to confront the origins and costs of our own emotional disengagement. May we learn from the seahorse to discern when our detachment is a necessary pause and when it is becoming a permanent barrier, and to understand that true connection lies not in remaining safely anchored, but in the courage to release our grip and allow ourselves to fully experience the rich, turbulent, and beautiful currents of human emotion. Chloe sat across from her therapist, recounting a devastating personal loss, her voice calm, almost monotone. Her face was expressionless, her hands still in her lap. "And how did that make you feel?" the therapist gently probed. Chloe paused, thought for a moment, and then replied, "I suppose I felt a bit sad." Her words belied the magnitude of the event. She had spent years mastering emotional suppression, pushing down anger, grief, fear, and even joy, believing that strong feelings were messy, dangerous, or a sign of weakness. Her internal world was a quiet, controlled landscape, but it came at a profound cost. A life lived in muted tones, where even the most vibrant experiences felt dull and flat. This relentless effort to keep her emotions at bay left her feeling perpetually exhausted, a silent prisoner in her own emotional desert. The seahorse, in its natural environment, exhibits remarkably muted expressions and reactions compared to many other marine creatures. They don't typically display overt signs of aggression, distress, or even excitement. Their method of fight or flight is often subtle camouflage or slow retreat. When threatened, they might change color slightly or simply drift into denser vegetation, without the frantic thrashing or dramatic displays seen in other fish. Their communication is largely visual and chemical, without the overt physical expressions of emotion. This absence of pronounced emotional displays is part of their survival strategy, allowing them to remain inconspicuous and conserve energy. For the seahorse, keeping its internal state hidden, its reactions minimal, is a fundamental aspect of its delicate existence, ensuring it doesn't draw undue attention. The human experience of emotional suppression directly mirrors the seahorse's muted expressions and reactions. In human neurobiology, chronic emotional suppression involves the active inhibition of emotional responses, often by the prefrontal cortex, attempting to override signals from the limbic system. This can lead to a dysregulation of emotions, where feelings are not processed, but rather bottled up, leading to a state of emotional blunting or even physical symptoms. Individuals might learn to suppress emotions due to cultural norms, past trauma, or a fear of vulnerability. Evolutionary psychology suggests that in certain social contexts, emotional restraint might have been adaptive for maintaining social harmony or avoiding conflict. However, prolonged emotional suppression leads to psychological distress, damaged relationships, and a reduced capacity for genuine joy and connection. Just as the seahorse minimizes its overt emotional displays, a person engaged in emotional suppression lives a life of internal containment, unable to fully experience or express their authentic emotional landscape, leading to a profound sense of inner quietness that often belies deep internal turmoil. Chloe felt the suffocating pressure of her own emotional silence, the quiet pain of a life lived without the vibrant spectrum of feelings. She was confronting the immense cost of her relentless emotional suppression, the way it robbed her of both profound sorrow and profound joy. Would she continue to live in this muted, controlled internal world, perpetually denying herself the fullness of human experience, safe but ultimately unfulfilled? Or would she, like a seahorse allowing itself a rare burst of activity during mating, dare to tentatively explore the submerged world of her own feelings, to express them, even if it felt messy and uncontrollable? Her instinct was to contain, to control, to keep everything neatly tucked away. But the profound exhaustion of maintaining the facade, the yearning for a life of authentic vibrancy, now demanded a different, more conscious choice. She had to acknowledge that her suppression was not just protecting her, but also slowly eroding her. The seahorse, as muted expressions and absence of dramatic reactions, offer a profound metaphor for the human struggle with emotional suppression. It teaches us that while controlling our feelings might offer a temporary sense of safety, a life lived in constant emotional restraint ultimately leads to profound dullness, psychological distress, and a diminished capacity for true connection. By understanding the primal impulse that drives the seahorse's quiet demeanor, we are invited to confront the origins and costs of our own emotional containment. May we learn from the seahorse to discern when our suppression is a necessary pause and when it is becoming a permanent barrier, and to understand that true emotional resilience lies not in the absence of feeling, but in the courage to allow ourselves to feel, to process, and to authentically express the full, vibrant spectrum of human emotion. James was known for his calm, unflappable demeanor. When his colleague received a major promotion, James offered a polite congratulations, showing no discernible excitement or envy. When his car broke down on the highway, he simply called for a tow truck, his voice devoid of frustration or panic. Friends often remarked on his zen-like nature, but privately, James felt a profound emptiness, a lack of apparent reaction that extended even to his own internal world. Major life events, both good and bad, seemed to pass him by without leaving a ripple on his emotional surface. He tried to muster enthusiasm or anger, but the response simply wasn't there. This passive existence, this inability to respond with genuine emotion, left him feeling disconnected from the very fabric of life, a perpetual observer, untouched by the world's most vivid experiences. The seahorse is characterized by a remarkable lack of apparent reaction to many external stimuli that would elicit strong responses from other fish. They don't typically exhibit rapid flight responses, aggressive displays, or overt signs of stress or pleasure. When a predator approaches, they might simply remain still, relying on their camouflage or slowly drift away. When feeding, Their suction-feeding mechanism is quick, but their overall demeanor remains calm and unperturbed. Their passive response to environmental changes or social interactions is a key aspect of their survival, allowing them to conserve energy and avoid drawing attention to themselves in a bustling marine ecosystem. For the seahorse, the absence of strong, overt reactions is a biological default, a continuous state of subtle movement and unhurried existence. The human experience of a lack of apparent reaction or emotional flatness directly parallels the seahorse's passive response. In human neurobiology, this can be a symptom of conditions like alexithymia or a long-term consequence of trauma, where the brain has learned to suppress emotional arousal to cope with overwhelming experiences. The insula, involved in interoception and emotional awareness, may show reduced activity. Psychologically, this flat affect can be a deeply ingrained protective mechanism, a way of avoiding the perceived dangers of strong emotions or overwhelming situations. Evolutionary psychology suggests that in highly dangerous or unpredictable environments, an ability to maintain a calm, unreactive exterior might have offered a survival advantage, preventing one from appearing vulnerable. However, when this becomes a chronic state, it leads to a profound disconnection from life's richness, an inability to experience empathy, joy, or genuine sorrow, ultimately isolating the individual from the human experience. James felt the chilling silence of his own emotional landscape, the unsettling absence of a natural response to the world around him. He was confronting the immense cost of his passive existence, the way it left him feeling like a phantom, unengaged and unfulfilled. Would he continue to drift through life, untouched by its currents, forever safe from emotional volatility, but also from its vibrant depths? Or would he, like a seahorse compelled to seek out a mate, dare to activate, to allow the genuine messy currents of emotion to rise within him, even if it felt uncomfortable and unfamiliar? His instinct was to remain calm, to show no reaction, to stay safe. But the profound emptiness, the yearning for a truly felt life, now demanded a different, more conscious choice. He had to acknowledge that his passive response was not just protecting him, but also slowly eroding him. The seahorse's passive response and lack of apparent reaction offer a profound metaphor for the human struggle with emotional flatness and detachment. It teaches us that while emotional composure can be valuable, a prolonged absence of genuine reaction ultimately leads to a profound disengagement from the richness and vibrancy of life. By understanding the primal impulse that drives the seahorse's unreactive nature, we are invited to confront the origins and costs of our own emotional suppression. May we learn from the seahorse to discern when our passivity is a strategic pause and when it is becoming a permanent barrier, and to understand that true resilience lies not in the absence of feeling, but in the courage to allow ourselves to respond authentically, embracing the full spectrum of human emotions. For it is in these reactions that we truly connect with life and each other. Maria had lived for years in a quiet state of emotional detachment, a serene and seemingly safe existence where intense feelings rarely disturbed the surface. But lately, a persistent dull ache had begun to surface, a longing for something more, a vague sense of unease with her own emotional stillness. She saw others experience vibrant joy, profound sorrow, passionate anger, and felt a quiet envy for their capacity to truly feel. This desire to reawaken her emotions, to break free from the numbness, terrified her. It felt like stepping onto unstable ground, risking chaos after years of careful control. The thought of experiencing overwhelming feelings after so long was daunting, yet the silent void within her was becoming unbearable. This moment was a profound confrontation with her own suppressed vitality, a terrifying leap towards a reconnected, messy, and truly lived life. Her breath hitched, her heart fluttered with a nascent, unfamiliar fear that also held the thrilling promise of life returning. While the seahorse often appears serene and unreactive, its life cycle includes moments of profound engagement and vulnerability, particularly during its mating dance. During courtship, seahorses shed their typical passive demeanor. They engage in an elaborate, often prolonged, and surprisingly energetic dance, intertwining their tails, changing colors, and moving with a deliberate, synchronized grace that is a stark contrast to their usual slow drift. This intricate ritual requires a temporary shedding of their usual elusiveness and a vulnerable, active engagement with another. It's a moment where their true, vibrant nature comes to the fore, signaling their readiness to connect and reproduce. This vulnerable dance is a crucial part of their existence, demanding a departure from their usual emotional and physical stillness, a testament to the fact that even for the most detached there are moments when deep instinctual connection demands an awakening of expression. The human journey of reawakening emotions after a period of prolonged disconnection directly mirrors the seahorse's vulnerable mating dance. In human psychology, this process involves consciously confronting and integrating previously suppressed emotions, often requiring guidance from therapy or supportive relationships. This re-engagement can feel uncomfortable, even terrifying, as old protective mechanisms are challenged. The limbic system, long muted, begins to reactivate, and new neural pathways for emotional processing are forged. Evolutionary psychology suggests that while emotional suppression can be adaptive in short-term trauma, long-term well-being and social connection depend on the capacity for full emotional experience. Just as the seahorse must shed its passive demeanor for its vital mating dance, a person seeking to reawaken their emotions must dare to be vulnerable, to allow the raw, unedited currents of feeling to surface, even if it brings discomfort, prioritizing authentic connection and a fully lived experience over continued emotional safety. Maria felt the tremor of unfamiliar feelings, a tentative stirring within her long-dormant emotional landscape. She was confronting the terrifying beauty of re-engagement, the choice between the safety of emptiness and the rich, unpredictable world of true feeling. Would she continue to live in her quiet, unfeeling world, forever safe from pain but also from joy? Or would she, like a seahorse entering its vulnerable mating dance, dare to embrace the discomfort of reawakening her emotions, to allow herself to feel deeply, to connect authentically, even if it meant risking heartbreak or overwhelming joy? Her instinct was to retreat, to maintain control, to stay numb. But the persistent longing for vitality, the yearning for a life lived in full color, now demanded a different, more courageous choice. She had to acknowledge that reawakening her emotions was not a threat, but the pathway to her truest, most vibrant self. The seahorse's vulnerable mating dance and its reawakening of expression offer a powerful and hopeful metaphor for the human journey of reconnecting with suppressed emotions. It teaches us that while emotional detachment can offer temporary protection, true vitality, profound connection, and a fully lived life emerge only when we dare to shed our numbness and embrace the full spectrum of our feelings. By understanding the primal imperative that compels the seahorse to engage in its intricate, vulnerable ritual, we are invited to cultivate the courage to explore our own inner emotional depths. May we learn from the seahorse that true emotional freedom lies not in the absence of feeling, but in the brave act of allowing ourselves to feel, to express, and to connect, entering the dance of life with our hearts fully open. Even with all its inherent vulnerabilities,